Hello, my name's Mark Sussman.
I think you could talk to me too.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, I'll talk to you.
Yeah.
I'll start over.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll edit.
Hello, my name's Mark Sussman, and I am a professor of theater at Concordia University, where we're sitting today. And I also work with a theater company that I founded about 30 years ago in New York City called Great Small Works. And I am the founder of a puppetry cabaret in Montreal called Café Concret that has been going since 2006. And Maggie asked me to speak a little bit about my theater work and the work we do with puppetry, particularly community-based projects that use puppetry and other forms of hybrid multidisciplinary performance. I'll talk a little bit maybe about my background first. Great Small Works is a theater collective, which means we don't have an artistic director. We're all artistic directors. There's 6 of us, and we do a lot of work with collaboration and with sharing the techniques that we know collectively with other people. And sometimes those people are theater folks, and sometimes they're not at all theater folks. Sometimes they're very young, very old, from all different communities. And what we love about the art form is that we get to mix people up a lot. We've done a lot of workshops with a form that we sort of revived in the mid-90s when we started, a form called toy theater or paper theater or théâtre de papier or Papierenthéâtre. There are many different names. Théâtre de papel in Spanish-speaking places. And toy theater or paper theater is a theater that is made to be performed on a tabletop in a miniature proscenium. And we just performed a new show the other night at Café Concret, which is why I'm thinking about it. And one thing that's lovely about the toy theater is that it's a theater of collage that involves cutting out images, characters, backdrops, scenery, finding text, and putting all those elements together in a collage, in a proscenium frame, and making tableaus. And a show is composed of tableaus, much in the way that a lot of what we see on the tiny screen, on the video screen, on the computer screen, are also composed of a sequence of tableaus, especially in forms that are animated. So the toy theater relates a lot to film and video and computer-based art, and the reason I mention that is it's something that a lot of people are familiar with. Mm-hmm. So without knowing it, they're familiar with this style of composition. And when we do toy theater workshops, which we've done in many parts of the world and with many generations of people and with graduate students and tiny children and families and whatnot, we try to harness this sort of knowledge that people already have about storytelling, about a story they may want to tell, or about stories they don't know they want to tell yet, but because they're put in a group in a workshop setting and they have 1 hour to come up with a story, or 3 hours to build a stage and build puppets and tell a story, they very quickly mobilize and make something. And we like to think of it as thinking with your hands, like you almost have to shut your brain off and just let your hands get busy, because the workshop constraints often have this very short time limit where you have to make something and show it to the rest of the group. So we've done, as I said, a lot of our own shows using the toy theater format. Some of them are quite large, some of them are quite tiny. We have a Hamlet show that's takes 20 minutes to perform. We have pieces based on novels from writers like Italo Calvino and W.G. Sebald and other writers. So we've really taken that form to a lot of different places, and it really is something that works because pretty much everywhere you go, although not everywhere, but many places you go, there'll be recycling bins with cardboard and paper, but also imagery and stories. So we like to think of the stories as recycled as well as the materials.
Nice. And when you facilitated some of these workshops with community members or people who have never tried this form before, maybe who might not consider themselves artists or creative people, what are some of the challenges that tend to come up when you're introducing this form for the first time and getting people to think with their hands and work fast?
Sure. Well, I would say the main one typically is that often people don't think of themselves as performers, and this is something as puppeteers we know very well, that puppetry can kind of free a kind of inner performer, or it can relax certain obstacles or inhibitions that people might have about performing, because it's not you, it's the object, and you're directing your focus to the object, and that somehow frees you to forget about the fact that an audience is watching, because they're not really watching you, they're watching the thing, the piece of cardboard or the piece of paper or the hand puppet or whatever it is, and you're devoting your energy into animating that thing. And in the toy theater and the paper theater form, that's translated to the puppets, but it's also to the stage as a whole. So it's sort of like the whole stage, because it becomes an animated space. And so that's one initial kind of obstacle and challenge. Very often is people don't want to be performers, so they'll want to be backstage, or they'll want to be off to the side, or they'll want to play music or sing, or do provide audio support, sound support in some way, which is great. But what they end up doing is performing anyway, and they end up kind of collectively performing the story. So whether you're moving a piece of cardboard, or you're singing, or you're being the narrator, you have to kind of be in sync with your fellow members of your little team around the table. So that's something that usually happens in the workshop. We don't start there, but that kind of gluing together of the different members and the people, making the show, that glue kind of emerges as the
as you start to work and play, and as the thing comes together and we start to see what it looks like. Do you find that sometimes people have challenges around creating the visual material, around being competent visual art makers? Sort of,
although it's pretty forgiving. We will kind of coach, as leaders of these workshops, we'll sometimes coach people to not work too small or not work too finely, but to try to make images big and, recognizable from a bit of a distance, and to keep the stage uncluttered. What we find also is that workshops will usually start with a building process, which is fun, and once people get into it, they often don't want to stop and transition from building to rehearsing. And that's always the resistance and the thing we have to nudge, usually, is sort of midway through the workshop. We have to warn everyone that we're putting away the glue guns, and we're putting away the tools, and we're putting away the scissors, and people have to just work with what they have and make a scene and think about time and think about storytelling. And what I also think happens that's so lovely is that the building process gets people very invested in the stuff, and then you want to see the stuff, used well, whether it's a backdrop or whether it's a set of puppets or whatever. So that sort of is a kind of shortcut around, what some people may have as a kind of resistance to performing or to thinking about themselves as performers.
Yeah. And then, because you said earlier, it's a lot like collage, so that's also possibly a way to come into the visual material easily, that you're sourcing images from other places and you're cutting and pasting to create story. So you're not being expected to draw a beautiful thing or create a highly designed thing. You're just playing with the materials and seeing what works and what reads and what communicates, then going with it.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the show that we did the other night, the Terror as Usual toy theater, really relies on cutouts, and because it's a theater that comments on the news, so we use news images, and so that is very much a theater of cutouts and cutting and pasting. But many of the toy theater workshops we've done, participants who have facility with drawing or with painting will, draw puppets and paint their own puppets or draw their own characters. And that's great too. It's not like that's forbidden.
Yeah.
But again, some people have more facility with drawing or with making a realistic likeness than others. So we want there to be a quick avenue for everybody, because the trick is to work fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. We're just going to talk for a couple minutes more, but
Sure.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about your work in Concordia.
Yeah, of course. So I'm here in the Department of Theater at Concordia, where we have 3 programs. One is a design program, one is an acting program, and the third one, which I'm more allied with, I guess, is called performance creation. And it's not that old. It's about, I would say, 4 years old at this point, but it's a revised curriculum from an older program that was called Theater and Development. And Theater and Development and Performance Creation are very grounded in the notion of theater as a community building art form, and something that can be done and taught in all kinds of places, spaces, urban, non-urban spaces, and it's dedicated to the idea that theater and performance construct community. They don't just reflect it, or they don't just go into pre-existing communities as forms of entertainment or forms of mirroring, which certainly theater can do and does very well. But performance creation has a little bit of an activist attitude, yeah, which is to say, like, theater in the street has a set of techniques that's very different from theater in, an auditorium with black curtains and red velvet seats. So we teach a lot of techniques and skill relating to oral history, relating to talking to people and constructing stories that are new out of the stories people tell us, or that we talk to us as artists, tell us about as artists. We do a lot of work with theater in the city, figuring out how the city can be a backdrop, or can be a stage for performance of all kinds, and what it means to intervene in the city with theater and performance. That's a very exciting part of that program.
And does that mean that the university itself is communicating directly with coordinators through the city of Montreal?
Not so much.
Oh, okay.
I think it's more professor by professor. Like, different professors will have connections in the city to spaces or different institutions, and so we'll do it with partnerships.
Okay.
With either different arts organizations or different community organizations. For example, an early project was done with our department and the Atwater Library, where students made pieces on the history of the St. Henry neighborhood.
Okay.
And they were staged in the Atwater Library. So that library had a welcoming librarian, and there was someone programming there, and we made a connection there. But we've done a lot of sort of getting outside of the university walls. We've also, since I've come here, we've had an internship with Bread and Puppet Theater in Vermont.
Oh, yeah.
Where students have gone and worked at their home base in Glover, making a show, and sometimes bringing that show back to Montreal and performing it in some location, sometimes not, sometimes performing it in Vermont only. So we've had a number of different, we call them now field schools, that's the new term, but really, they're just getting outside.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about all
Okay.
kinds of things,
Sure,
of course.
we will.
We will, and it's great to have you
Yeah,
in
thanks.
the community and participating in our little project.
Great.
So thanks again, and I'll keep you posted of people's response overall.
Sounds good. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.